Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to start shortly, and I will let Melissa get us started on our workshop today, Renting versus Buying, Navigating Housing Decisions.
Hi, everyone. I am so sorry. I'm having trouble starting my video. I was on camera just a moment ago, but Brian, if you can help here, it says I'm unable to start.
I'll take a look.
Okay, but we will get started nonetheless. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on renting versus buying, navigating housing decisions. Today, we want to share information to help you make more informed and intentional decisions about what and where you call home, pros and cons, and just various perspectives about these types of decisions. Let's see. Still unable to start. Okay, we are here. All right, next slide, please. All right, let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is Melissa Mazard. I am an accredited financial counselor and AFC here at Questus.
And I'm Kimberly Essie. I am also an accredited financial counselor with Questus. Really excited to be joining you and having this conversation.
All right. As I mentioned, we want to provide you with unbiased information about renting and buying. Next slide. There is no right or wrong answer when it comes to this. In fact, Kimberly and I have two very different living arrangements. She is a homeowner. I am a renter. She lives in a mid-sized city and I in a major city. So again, there's no judgment on our end. What's correct is what you want and what is comfortable for you. And we hope that what we present to you today will help you make a choice that will advance your financial and personal goals. So our objectives by the end is that attendees will understand key factors involved in renting and buying a home and have the ability to evaluate their personal situation and make informed decisions between renting and buying based on their unique goals and circumstances. Next slide. So when you rent, you are a tenant who pays a landlord, whether that be a property manager or an actual person, and you are paying them for the ability to live in their property. There's usually a time stipulation. You can rent for a year, several years, or only a few months, or you can even have a month-to-month lease. There are a lot of pros when it comes to renting. For one, renting allows for greater flexibility with relocation. Renters have less maintenance responsibilities, and renting usually is a lot less costly on the front end. Now, on the other hand, when you rent, your money is used towards the landlord's property, and they're the ones who's building equity or value in the home, which they can only borrow from or make money from when they sell. Also, when you have a landlord, they decide on the rent price and can choose to raise the rent. Some areas have limits where how much rent can be raised. And technically the market determines rental prices, but either way, when you rent, the rental amount is not something you can control. And your landlord may also decide to sell or not rent their property out anymore. So since so much is out of your control when it comes to renting, this could lead to some insecurities and instability. And we'll go into detail about these topics more, but we're just providing a quick overview now. Next is buying. When you buy, you are taking ownership of the property. Owning comes with having full rights to the property, including the ability to sell, to rent out, or to renovate. Owning also comes with a lot of responsibility. Homes are some of the most expensive purchases we'll ever make, and most people can only purchase a home using a loan. Not all. However, there are others who are able to purchase a home with the money that they have available and pay for the home outright. But typically, a home comes with obtaining a loan. When you buy a home, you're building equity. Having equity in your home means that there is a difference between your home's market value and the amount that you still owe on the mortgage. So hopefully there's growth and an appreciation in the value of your home over time, and the payments you may go towards reducing your mortgage balance. You want to have, of course, as much of a difference as possible and to build equity as much as possible. Owning a home feels a lot more stable for many people, and that is mainly because you have a lot more control over things when you are the owner of the property. On the flip side, there can be a higher financial lift to obtain and purchase a home. As a owner, you are responsible for the upkeep, both for the inside and outside of your home. And unfortunately, though there are a lot of controls and control an owner has over many aspects, property owners cannot dictate the market or demand for their home, and sometimes home values do decline. But in many cases, property values go up, which is great, but that also means that your property taxes will go up as well. And a property tax is a bill that must be paid. And again, we'll go into further details in future slides. All right, let's get into and start with financial considerations. Finances are not the whole story, but they are a very important part of housing decisions. And there are several financial decisions to consider. So the first one is upfront costs. Renting typically requires a security deposit and a possible fee for credit checks or application processing. A security deposit is a payment that you make to the landlord in addition to your first month's rent, and it's commonly required for moving in. Your deposit could be equal to 1 month's rent or more, or it could be less. Security deposits help protect the landlords from loss. So, for example, any damages made to the property or any unpaid rent balances, your security deposit goes to help offset those costs. Your deposit will be refunded in part or in full when you move out, depending on the final circumstances. And if you have a pet, you may also be required to put down a pet deposit, which again helps protect the landlord in the event your pet causes damage to their property. When buying a home, upfront costs include down payment, which can start as low as 3% and can go up to 20% or more of the property price. There's also closing costs that range from 2 to 5% of the loan amount. And there's fees such as inspections to evaluate the condition of your home, appraisal fees to determine the value of your home. There's also loan origination fees, which are built into the loan, but they do add up to your upfront costs. Next are ongoing costs. With renting, these include the monthly rent, of course. Some rentals also wrap the monthly utility bills into your rent amount, but that's not always the case. If you have a pet, there may also be a pet rent. Also, many rentals require you to have rental insurance. This may be required at the time that you sign the lease. And I'm not too sure if many landlords keep up with ensuring that you maintain this type of insurance, but it is good practice to have renter's insurance because it does help protect your belongings. And when you buy, mortgage payments are of course due monthly. If you live in a community with a homeowners association, you will have to pay an HOA fee. You may also have to pay for private mortgage insurance or PMI if your down payment for a home is less than 20%. PMI protects the lender in the event that you default on your loan. And this type of insurance can drop off when there's enough equity in your home, or you can request to have your PMI removed if your home's value increases and you're able to get an appraisal to verify this. Property tax payments are also required. every homeowner pays property tax based on their home's value and the property tax rates for the county or city that they're in. Most areas charge property taxes semi-annually. Homeowners insurance is also very important. It is insurance that helps provide financial security from any losses or damage to your home. There are different types of insurances. Some can be broad and others are more specific, like flood insurance, fire, or earthquake. When you are a homeowner, you are responsible for the maintenance, any repairs or replacements of appliances, systems, plumbing, holes in the wall, all of it has to be paid for by the owner. Whereas when you're a renter, you can simply call the landlord and hopefully they take care of it and take care of it quickly for you. Let's talk a bit about affordability. So there are low-cost living areas as well as high-cost living areas. In low-cost regions, buying a home could be more feasible. Homes and other expenses aren't as high, whereas in high-cost areas, renting may be more affordable. When it comes to rent or buy prices, take a look at the average rent prices and just compare it to how much homes are selling for. How much of a loan could you qualify for? In addition to the loan or mortgage amount, what would your interest rate be? Interest is the cost for borrowing money, and the loan amount and the interest rate determine your monthly mortgage payment. Analyze the cost of living in the areas you're interested in and take a look at how it all affects your overall spending. And consider your ongoing costs, everything else you need to pay for. This would include your food and entertainment, your children's education and their extracurricular activities, transportation costs, any other debt you may need to take on or that you already have. So paying more for housing just leaves less money for other areas in your spending and just could make it more difficult to make ends meet. So affordability is key. So let's segue a bit into income planning. Excuse me. Life, as we know, costs money. Many, however, we don't take the time to consider exactly what those costs are. And by that, I mean actually putting things on paper and evaluating the numbers. But with this information, you can then work backwards to determine how much you need to comfortably live by your standards. So different areas require different earnings amounts. And there's a tool online called the Living Wage Calculator. It was developed by researchers at MIT to help us determine and estimate the local wage rate that a full-time worker would need to earn hourly to cover the cost of their family's basic needs where they live. So in this research, which is updated annually, the basic needs include childcare, food, healthcare, housing, internet and mobile services, transportation, entertainment, housing necessities, and taxes. And it shows how much 1 to 2 adults would need to earn based on their household size and their number of children. On the slide is an example of the wage amounts for the Washington, D.C. area. In D.C., at the bottom, you'll see the minimum wage is $17 an hour, but a single adult with no children would need to earn a living wage of $27 to be self-sufficient, to be able to cover their basic needs. Once you start adding children, of course, you see those wage earnings need to be a lot higher. And on the right side, with both adults working, those are the amounts each adult would need to earn and contribute and bring in separately into the household. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are for basic needs. If you're looking to travel or take family trips, or if you want to eat out more often, shop more often, if you have expensive taste or self-care regimens, these all add up and will require you to earn an even higher living wage. So plan your income around the amount you will need to live comfortably and to thrive. And know these numbers in advance and use that information to help you steer more intentionally and pursue employment opportunities that will pay you enough to pay for your housing and support your lifestyle. No problem, Kimberly. I will share that link at the end, or when Kimberly starts talking, I will share that link to the living wage calculator. So how does credit play into our housing decisions? When it comes to renting, your credit history and your score can affect your security deposit amount. As mentioned, security deposits can be equal to 1 month's rent, but it could be lower or higher. But this is based on your credit score. The lower your score, the more you may need to put down as a deposit. The amount of debt you hold and the monthly debt payments aren't typically considered with your rental application. So if you have credit card payments, car loans, student loans, you could still be approved for a rental without any consideration as to how all those payments will affect your ability to pay. So for example, let's say you earn $4,000 a month and your total monthly debt payments are $2,000, but your rental will be another $2,000. That wouldn't leave any money for food or entertainment or any of the other things. So the numbers typically aren't crunched in that way to determine whether or not you can truly afford a rental. So you'd have to make that determination yourself and really look at those numbers on your own. And lastly, for rent, most of the time, rent payments are not reported to credit bureaus. And so you're not getting credit or building a positive credit reputation for all of those on-time payments that you make towards your rental. On the other side, you're also not getting dinged for any late or missed payments. However, there are rent reporting services that are becoming more and more popular. These are options that landlords or property managers can use to report rent. However, this is something that they'd have to opt into and most of the time pay for. I've also seen self-rent reporting services, all of which could help you build credit history. But I do want to note that there are many versions of credit scores and credit scoring models, and not all models take into consideration information about rent payments. And not all lenders use the specific type of model or score that have your rent payments reflected in them. And so that might be confusing and this all does add to the confusion of credit itself. But just know in general that currently rent payments aren't widely reported, and if they are, they're not widely recognized. So this doesn't mean you should not make your rent payments on time, though. Having this discipline is a good habit to have for your overall financial wellness. So when it comes to buying a home is where credit matters most. Your credit history and your score are heavily examined to determine your eligibility for a home. And to take it further, your score, depending on what band it lands in, will impact your loan options and interest rates that you qualify for. So on the right, you'll see, please note that these are not the actual scoring ranges. This is just an image that I found. But let's say you fell within the fair range. You may qualify for a completely different loan and interest rate than you would if you were in the good or excellent range. And this could have a drastic effect on your monthly mortgage payment and your overall, the amount that you pay for the home. And this could mean that you're paying as much as 5 to 6 figures more because you bought a home with a lower credit rating. So lenders determine what score borrowers need to receive the lowest interest rate that they're offering. But know that when it comes to buying, your credit score and your credit history is very important. Your debt and monthly payments are also very much considered. If you have too much debt, you may not qualify for a loan, or you may not be approved for the full loan amount that you need to purchase the type of home you want. Lenders use a equation called the debt to income calculation as a guideline for mortgage approvals, with 36% being an ideal ratio. Some lenders even go up to 40 or 50%. The lower your debt to income, your DTI, the better, not just in terms of getting approved, but also for your financial stability and your financial comfort. The income used in the calculation is the gross income, which is income before taxes or paycheck deductions. And as we know, we do not live off of that amount. We live off of less, which is our net income, the amount that's actually deposited into our accounts. And so even if or when you are approved with a or at a 36% or more DTI, it will be in your best interest to go lower. Note that mortgage lenders get paid commissions based on how much of a loan they sell, and some may not really be concerned about your financial well-being. Their only focus might be just to make and close sales, and after the sale, you're the one left to make the payments, and if you can't afford the payments, you're the only one responsible. So again, be careful with your debt to income ratio. Taking on a home loan obviously adds to your debt load, and this can affect your ability to qualify for future loans, such as car loans or education loans. So it also takes into effect it also affects the amounts you have left for other expenses. So do what's best for your finances and avoid loan amounts that will bring your debt to uncomfortable levels. Now, luckily, your mortgage payments do count towards your credit history, which means it helps when you do make your payments on time. But it also hurts when you don't make them on time or don't make them at all. And lastly, no matter if you are renting or buying, when you go turn on utilities for your home, for example, gas or electricity, you may have to put down a deposit with the utility company. And that deposit, again, depends on your credit rating. So your credit will also affect you when it comes to the utilities for your home. And lastly, for financial considerations is wealth building. With renting, you are not building equity. The owner of the property whom you pay your rent to is reaping the benefit, and so you won't get any return in the end. However, with the savings you get from not having to maintain the home or pay taxes or all of those other costs, you can choose to invest that money elsewhere and possibly yield investment returns in another way. We discussed equity earlier. When you are an owner, there's potential for the property values to appreciate, to grow, and that, along with reducing your mortgage balance, helps to accumulate equity and can be a significant part of building wealth over time. I do want to point that in order to actually realize this value, though, you would have to sell your home and lock in those gains. That is if you're that is if you are living in your property and there's no income being generated from it. Now, if you do rent out your home and the rent you collect is enough to cover your mortgage and then some, now this becomes passive income where you are now a landlord and the rent payments you receive can be used to help build your wealth over time. All right, let's get into the next section, which is all about life and personal style. What do you want with your housing and life experience? First, consider your location. Do you prefer more busy urban areas, or is the quiet and space what you're looking for? Urban areas are typically very popular in premium locations, and this higher demand leads to higher costs. In these areas, homes and properties are smaller, no matter if you rent or buy, and renting may be more common due to affordability challenges. These areas are great if you like having the ability to walk to places that you frequent. Metropolitan areas are great for connecting with diverse groups of people as well. And in many, not all, but many urban areas, public transportation is pretty accessible and useful. Suburban areas typically offer more space and potentially more affordable housing options. In this area, buying is often seen as a better long-term investment. Rural areas typically have the lowest property costs. There's more land and space, but there's also fewer amenities. Um, buying can also be more affordable or most affordable, though the resale value of that home may be a concern. Are you an outdoorsy person? Do you enjoy taking hikes or being in nature, clean or less polluted areas? In LA, for example, you have the city living, you have the pollution, but you also have plenty of canyons to hike on, beaches. A few hours away are the mountains, but you are paying high prices to live in that area. In terms of sites, what is around? What do you want to be around? I once drove across country once, and when I got to the Oklahoma, Northern Texas area, I literally saw tumbleweed. And up until then, I had never seen tumbleweed, only in cartoons. And so that area was very flat and not much was around. And although it was beautiful to see, be able to see the sky for miles, there was just nothing interesting there to me. So consider the location, not only in terms of the cost, but the environment and how it feels and what you want to be around. All right, what about moving? Sometimes we just have to or want to move. Um, Maybe there's a career opportunity elsewhere. Maybe you want to move closer to family, or maybe you want to pivot and chase your dreams. No matter what it is, change happens, things change over time. So with renting, it is easier to move. If you have to break your lease, you will probably still be responsible for some rent, whether it be all of the remaining months in your portion or some portion of it in your lease or a portion of what's remaining. But leases typically aren't very long. Again, you can have month-to-month leases, a year leases, or 2 leases. And this offers greater flexibility with mobility. Now, when you buy, it's a different story. If you suddenly have to uproot and move, you'll have to decide what you want to do with your home, whether you live there or not, you are still responsible for making the mortgage payment each month. You can decide to either sell the property or rent it out. Either of these scenarios can happen quickly or it could take time. And when you do sell, you may or may not sell at a gain. So consider what you would do during the time it takes to sell. Would you be able to afford to pay for 2 places to live at once? If instead you choose to keep the home and rent it, are you willing to be a landlord and would you want to hire a property manager? And again, put some thought into what you would do if there wasn't a renter for some time and you had to make those mortgage payments yourself. So there's always an option to just move and leave it all behind as well. But unfortunately, when you own, there are greater consequences for this. And this has an effect on many people's decisions to move. All right, how creative do you want to be with your home? As a renter, there's limited availability to make significant changes to the property. Any modifications you want to make usually require your landlord's approval. I'm seeing very interesting and pretty chic peel and stick options for countertops, cabinets, floors, and so there are options to make some changes. However, the major changes are usually off limits. As a buyer, you do have full control over the property. You can make renovations, remodel, and customize your home to suit your personal tastes and needs. Note that there are some limitations to this, though, if you live in a home with an HOA. All right, stability and roots. Renting can lead to housing uncertainty if the landlord decides not to renew the lease or to sell the property. And there's unfortunately not much you can control here, especially if you rent directly from someone, such as if you're renting a room or renting their home. However, if you live in a complex or a building, there may be some laws in your area to protect you in these situations. Buying provides a sense of permanence and the ability to establish long-term roots in a community. Homeowners are usually more careful and care more about their community and are more involved in the community's wellness. And many have shared many have the shared value of not wanting their wanting their homes to increase in value. So many homeowners want their property values to increase. So they might care for their home and the cleanliness of their neighborhoods more. No matter if you are renting or buying, consider the culture of the community you're interested in being a part of. Are you looking for diversity? Is being around a lot of mom and pop shops important to you, or are big box stores okay? Do you want homes and buildings with character, or do you prefer perfectly designed cookie cutter neighborhoods? And lastly, with leadership, who are the people in charge? What do they believe in? And do they align with your beliefs? And for the last part of life and personal style considerations, what opportunities do you want to be around and be a part of? Economic environment, consider what are the growth projections for the area and in what areas will there be growth specifically? What about the workforce and employment environment? What is the unemployment rate? Are there jobs? What kind of jobs? What are the average earnings at these jobs? We talked about income planning earlier. Are there entrepreneurs and inventors around? New ideas help to grow economies. And if you're an entrepreneur yourself, are there opportunities to collaborate with like-minded thinkers? Can businesses thrive in that area? When it comes to equality, are things equitable? This could mean for various demographics, whether it's gender, race, or ability. Education, what are the quality of the schools? And romantic, are you looking for love? Dating experts often share that the best and worst places to have a healthy dating life. So consider the dating scene and the types of people you may meet in various areas. All right, and I will pass it on to Kimberly now.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm having a similar issue to Melissa and her Zoom video earlier, so I'm unable to share my face, but I hope you can all hear me. So we're going to briefly talk about market and economic impacts and factors that you'll want to consider in the rent to buy decision. So firstly, we'll want to consider the real estate market, and let's talk a little bit about that on the next slide. So, when we think about markets in general, you've probably heard about supply and demand, and this applies to anything where there's a good or service that a demographic wants or needs, and what they're willing to spend, and what the cost is, and how that can change over time. So, when we think about the real estate market, supply and demand is a huge factor in determining the cost of the home that you may be purchasing. It also affects the cost of rent in your local economy. If there's a very low number of rentals that are available, then the rent is going to be pretty high. I know that in my local area, that has been the case for a long time. And so the ability for people to actually get a place that's affordable to rent, it almost makes more sense in some cases for them to buy, even though they may only be able to do a 3% down payment. And so that's going into their decision. The supply of affordable rentals is going to impact when and where they buy. It can also affect, as far as homes available, if someone can afford to buy where they work. And with the ability for many people to work remotely, there's a lot more ability to move. And as Melissa has talked about, you get to make a little bit more flexible decisions about where that would be based on your preferences for neighborhoods, your economic reality, the ability for you to buy a home, or your interest in renting versus buying. So, supply and demand is just a huge part of this conversation. And this goes not just for looking for a place to live, it also goes with people, it has to do with people who are considering selling their home, considering renting their home and buying somewhere else, or renting, or even setting up a tiny home in their yard, moving into that and renting their home. All of this has to do with the supply and demand of, can they afford to move somewhere else? Are they going to sell their home at a loss? This all has to do with how many homes and rentals are available in an economy. And when we think about the economy, I know we hear a lot about the US economy, but we're also thinking about our local economy, because that's really what is affecting our ability to buy or sell where we live. And it's affecting our interest in potentially moving elsewhere to an economy we can afford a little better or that suits our needs more. So again, supply and demand is going to impact your decision. I'm sure that it impacts most people's decisions in everything they're doing. But the competition piece here relates to sellers and buyers in this supply and demand environment. So if there's, let's say you're in your local economy, there are a lot of homes for sale, then you as a buyer are going to be able to have more ability to negotiate prices downward if that's, a possibility where you live. If there's a lot of supply and maybe low demand, then you have bargaining power as a buyer. And so maybe that's going to push your decision to buy sooner than, later perhaps. This also relates to sellers. So if you own a home, and so I'm a home owner, as Melissa mentioned, so I might look at the economy and say, well, a lot of houses are for sale right now, and they're very similar in price and character to my house. So I don't think I'm going to want to sell right now, because I don't think I'll get the top of the market price that I'm looking for. And so I'm going to kind of bow out of being part of the supply. And over time, that's going to change the supply in my area, because other people are probably going to be thinking the same thing. I want to talk about interest rates. That'll be in the next slide, but that definitely impacts our supply and demand of homes, and also our interest in rentals. So with the high interest environment, a lot of people are choosing not to sell, and because they need to live somewhere, and if they sell, they're going to have to absorb a higher interest rate where they buy if they need to take a mortgage out. So again, that's going to affect your ability as a potential buyer to have a lot of options when you go to find a house. It may be the case that, at least where I live, it is, that there's just not that many houses for sale. So you might be in a position where you want to buy, and maybe there's just not enough supply. And so the people that are selling their house are getting higher prices because they know that there's not a lot of houses out there that they have to compete with. So, in considering the buy versus rent decision, it's going to change over time. And currently, you might be thinking, well, I want to buy, but I'm not ready. You might be waiting till you have more negotiation power. Maybe you're waiting to control that conversation. Maybe you're waiting for more houses to be on the market so that you feel like you have a better chance of getting your offer accepted. You feel like interest rates are going down, and maybe you're going to have a better interest rate if you wait it out a little. These are all very complicated parts of the decision, but it's something to keep in mind when you're looking at your real estate market and also considering moving to a different market. Okay, so let's talk a little about interest rates. So, as we know, um, the Feds recently cut the interest rate. I'm going to show you a really cool infographic in a few minutes, but for now, if you're in this webinar, you're probably thinking about buying a home. And so you're probably watching interest rates pretty closely. So interest rates and financing are a huge part of, supply and demand of homes. So if I am a homeowner and I'm seeing that interest rates are going down, then if I want to move somewhere else, I might be more likely to put my house on the market for you to buy. And because interest rates are going down, you're going to look at that and say, well, I might actually be able to afford to buy this home that I wasn't able to afford before, because I was really, really scared of that like 6 or 7% interest rate. And so this is an interesting and economic shift now, because interest rates have been kind kind of steady for a while, and they've been higher than we've seen in a long time. So the fact that interest rates are starting to go down, we may see a change in the supply and demand and the competition in our wider economy and in your local economy. So definitely watch the economic conditions really closely of what's going on where you live or where you want to buy. What you're seeing happening in the larger US economy is not necessarily going to reflect what's happening where you live. But interest rates and the fact that they're starting to go down means that you might be ready to start having those conversations about buying. Now, how is that going to affect the conversation you're having with a mortgage lender? So now that interest rates are going down, you are probably going to have just a better quote when you're having these conversations with the mortgage lender, but it also gives you the ability to potentially buy down your mortgage rate. So this would be mortgage points, and maybe you've heard about this, but it's upfront fees you can pay your mortgage lender to exchange for a lower interest rate. So you might be getting a quote for, let's say, 5%, and you're saying, well, that's a little high. I think if I were at 4 or even 3.5, I can afford this. You're looking at all of your spending planning and you're saying, that's what I can afford. Then you can have a negotiation with a lender to say, here's what I can actually afford. How much money will it cost me up front to buy my rate down? This is a very common thing when you're buying a home, to be able to have that conversation about mortgage points. You can weigh the pros and cons of doing that. You can say, well, it's going to cost me more now, but in the long run, I'm going to save this much if I plan to keep this mortgage for the length of the mortgage term. You can also do a break even calculation. Coaches can help with this kind of thing, but also mortgage lenders are really a very good first resource. And then coaches can look at what they're giving you and say, okay, well, here's the good, here's the bad, pros and cons, and we can help you make a decision that works for you. But typically they'll give you a break even calculation, which is how long would you need to be in the home for that decision to buy your points up front, for that decision to make sense for you financially. So you don't necessarily have to accept the rate you're given. There's a lot of negotiation that can happen, and definitely as rates go lower, that can happen more and more. So don't be afraid to have those conversations. Lenders want this because they're getting more money up front. And oftentimes people will refinance their mortgages at some point, especially if they have a 30-year loan. So it's not an uncommon conversation. The lender's getting more money up front. You're spending more, but you're getting a lower rate. And as long as you're keeping that mortgage long enough, that might make sense for you. If you're thinking you're going to refinance at some point, maybe that doesn't make sense. But keep in mind that if you refinance, there are upfront costs, just like Melissa was mentioning. Getting a refinance loan it's a new loan. So all of your upfront costs and fees are going to be attached to that. Yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about this slide. So we'll go to just a brief infographic about, yes, so this is the average 30-year rate over time. So this shows you the fluctuation of interest rates year over year for 30 years. So as you can see, even though we've been kind of in a higher interest environment for a few years now, it's not as high as it's been. In fact, it's on the low end compared to the 30-year average. In the 80s, you can see, 13.88% an average, 16.04%. These are really, really high. I mean, imagine the savings, the savings account rate, that pros and cons, right? But this is the lending rate. This is what you're paying a bank to have the ability to use money to buy a house. So even though it feels a little high, it's not necessarily historically high. I think that we could go lower, but we could go higher, as you can see. And so the buying decision is oftentimes linked to this. And I know that with interest rates going down, people will be more interested in buying, and that will affect your negotiation power. It will also affect supply and demand in your area. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. A few tax implications, because this is also something that when people come to me to talk about this decision, they're very concerned about the tax implications. And even though we aren't tax professionals, we can talk a little bit about what you can expect as far as the impact of buying a home on your taxes. So, renting and tax impact. So, there's not really uh, a lot of states that have deductions or tax credits for renting. There's nothing as far as like federal deductions as far as renting goes. But let's talk a little bit about home ownership and tax credits. So if you are currently renting, let's say, then maybe you don't have a lot of itemizing that you're doing on your taxes, and the standard deduction is just a better bang for the buck for you. That now, if you buy a home, that might still be the case. And I want to explain a little bit why that would be the case still. So, as far as deductions for taxes and home ownership, I heard when I was buying my first home, I heard a lot about, oh, it's really a good thing because you can deduct your mortgage interest. You can deduct this, you can deduct that. So, unless you're deducting more than your standard deduction rate, it's not really worth it. And if you have a really, let's say, a high interest rate, you have a large payment you're making for interest. If it's more than your standard deduction, then yes, owning can benefit you because then you're able to itemize and therefore getting a larger tax deduction. But the standard deduction is so high right now, you would have to really have a lot of money going to interest for that to really make sense for you. So I think it's worth looking at your particular situation and saying, if I do take on this loan, here's what the interest is going to be. Is that going to be enough for me to itemize? Is it going to be more than my standard deduction? And that's really where you'll want to consider the pros and cons of a home as far as a tax deduction. But I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding on that because you can't take the standard deduction and itemize your interest payments. So it's one or the other. So this, again, that's something to talk about with a tax professional to figure out if that makes sense for you. Just some basic information there, though. And for the mortgage interest that is tax deductible in 2024, it would be for a loan up to $750,000 for individuals filing as single. For a married but filing separately couple, it would be 375,000. If you have questions on that, the IRS website on this is actually really pretty clear and helpful. But you can also just search. There's several articles that you'll find online that will give a little more information about that particular topic. But I also think it's important to know because Melissa mentioned property taxes and how those can go up over time. Uh, you can deduct up to $10,000 as the limit for state and local real estate taxes. That can include property taxes, income taxes, and real estate taxes relating to your home. And that changes every year. It may change every year, I should say. So you also want to consult the IRS website, your state tax website, to know how much you as a person who buys a home and can deduct taxes, how much you would be able to deduct. So just some general information for you there as a guide to help you do a little more research on the buy versus rent decision. And again, just to remind you, you can't do a standard deduction and itemize. So these deductions I'm mentioning only count if you're planning to itemize. And there's some other situations where you as a homeowner may be able to deduct taxes, deduct things that you're paying on your taxes. So if you're interested in learning more about that, uh, so coaches can give information that we're finding about this, but as far as your tax situation, we cannot give tax advice. So I would highly suggest talking to a tax professional about what will work for your situation. All right, and then we have one more slide about taxes, I promise. It's almost over with the taxes. So tax benefits of home ownership, we already went through these. There are deductions that you can take that can help your tax situation if they're greater than your standard deduction. And I do want to mention capital gains exclusion because this is something that is actually a really good benefit of being a homeowner. So the capital gains exclusion is meant to help you as a homeowner not have to pay capital gains tax over the life of owning your home. So a lot of other investments, even if you're not, let's say, taking money out of an investment, you've got money in the stock market. If it's in a taxable account, then you're still going to be paying the capital gains on that each year. With a home, you're not having to do that at all until you sell the home. So you're realizing your capital gains tax the year you sell your home. And in some cases, you may not actually have to pay capital gains. And this is something that I didn't know until after I was a homeowner. And that's something that was just icing on the cake for me. So if I'd known before, I might have bought sooner. The way it works is that depending on your income, you may not have to pay any tax on your long-term gain in owning a home. It's 2 years that you would own a home before that would be accurate for you. So you need to be a homeowner for 2 years. You need to own that home for 2 years. But once you own the home for 2 years, no matter what your income is, if you sell your home for a gain of less than $250,000 single or $500,000 married filing jointly, you will not owe capital gains on that amount. So if you sell your home as a single person and you make $250,000, no matter how much you earn, you will not have to be paying capital gains on that. But if it's anything more than that as a single person, then you're going to pay the relevant capital gains based on your income. So it can often be 15 to 20% based on your income. But if you earn less than a certain amount, it can be 0%. This is where I highly recommend checking out the IRS site because it will tell you what your income needs to be in order to not have to pay the capital gains on the sale of your home. It will also tell you and help guide you in knowing what, if you have to pay, what percentage you're going to be paying, the 15 or the 20%. So this is something to keep in mind with a home. This also is relevant to a rental property. So with a rental property, you are going to have to pay capital gains. This is only going to be on your primary home that you could avoid if you gain 250,000 or less, single 500,000 or less, married. If it's your primary home, then those are the amounts where you wouldn't pay capital gains. But if it's a rental property, that doesn't apply. You will pay capital gains at the 15 or 20% rate. So that's something to keep in mind, but it is a way for people to own homes and rental properties without having to pay capital gains each year. Okay, I think that's it for taxes.
All right, we have a few minutes left. Let's talk about the future. When you are deciding on housing, think about your personal near or long-term goals. And this is for your personal growth. So next slide, please. Where do you see yourself? What do you want for yourself? What do you want to accomplish? Explore how renting and buying fits into your strategies and consider the long-term impacts of each option. And today we shared several factors to consider, but ultimately the decision is yours to make and should be based on your personal desires and the visions you have for your life. So we're constantly hearing about the American dream, but I want to encourage you to think about your personal American dream. A house, family, dog, picket fence, that may be it for some people, but is it right for you? So staying true to yourself, to your financial abilities, your goals, your desires, this will help lead to greater satisfaction, happiness, and stability in life. So hopefully the information we shared to you can help you with your housing decisions. Next slide. We will be answering questions. We have a few minutes for questions, but if you would like to discuss more personal questions or crunch some numbers, please reach out to a financial coach at Questus. You can scan the QR code there. If you are on your phone and cannot scan the code, go to go.myquestus.com and you'll be able to see the calendars of all the coaches at Questus and get onto their calendar. So at this time, we do have some time for some questions. I didn't see any in the chat, but Kimberly, you tell me if I'm wrong, or if anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat.
I don't see any questions, but we'll be on for a few more minutes. If anyone has any questions, you can also always schedule a coaching session if you have more specific targeted questions you'd like to talk about relating to this topic or any financial topics you encounter. And yeah, we'll just wait a few minutes. But we really appreciate you joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much for being here and allowing us to share. Hopefully it was all very helpful for you. I think we gave them a lot of information. I think we answered all the questions in the presentation completely.
It's a lot of information and it's a lot in an hour.
Yes, yes. So. In the Q&A section, it says, is there a good calculator to compare buying versus renting and investing? Kimberly, do you know of any calculators?
Yes, we actually have one in the platform. Let me link you to it. I like this one. I think it's really comprehensive. I also like this because it allows a coach to see what's going on with as far as your calculations to help guide you through different scenarios you can create. And because it's in the platform, us coaches can see and work through that with you in real time. So I had this pulled up just in case, and then I got logged out. So let me pull this up for you shortly. And then if you're finding that you don't really like the calculator, I definitely recommend reaching out to us via email or a session, and we can figure out what specifically you would like to see in a calculator, and we can improve our calculator or we can recommend a different one. But I think this one will be a fabulous resource for you. So this is the rent versus buy calculator in our platform. And I can't share that with the whole group. I don't have access to the chat. So Melissa, if you're able to do it, I'll share it with you. And then if you want to put that in the chat, other people can see that too.
Okay, trying to copy, it's difficult to copy things in Zoom. Let's see if I got it. Yeah, I got it. I put it in the main chat box.
Okay.
I saw the question earlier about the credit score image and the ranges. No, that was not an accurate image. It was just a picture that I found. I did make that disclaimer, maybe it was missed, but there are some credit score ranges that go higher than 850. But again, there's so many scores out there and different lenders use different scores, and it's just very complicated and just an area that we will have another presentation about. So stay tuned for our credit presentation.
But for the most part, with a house purchase, they're going to use those two main scores, which is Vantage Score or FICO. And
Yeah.
FICO and Vantage Score actually have other scores that go higher than 850, but for the most part, with a house purchase, they're going to be using those two basic ones.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you, Kimberly, for collaborating and doing this presentation. I hope you all got something out of it. Kimberly, did you want to say anything else?
No, that's it. I appreciate everyone's time and thanks for joining us.
All right, have a good one.